everyone, this is Nitreg from nitreg.com, and today I'm going to be going over what I think is the most important concept in probably all of poker. It's like one of those things that if you really nail down, you will become just a great player. It seems like super obvious, but it's just one of those things that a lot of people don't really do, and they never think about, when should I be betting. So, I mean, it sounds really obvious, but I swear you guys need to hear this out. It's really hard to master this concept entirely. So let me ask the question: when should I bet? Well, there are only two primary reasons that we are betting in poker. One is for value, and the second as a bluff, and that's it. People make up all this other stuff about why they're betting, but it really comes down to, is it value or is it bluff? And there's really not room for anything else. And those are the two primary reasons. There are a couple secondary reasons, but they're always in unison with value or bluffing. So let's go ahead and move on. I realize that, again, value and bluff might seem super obvious to most of us, but if I asked a lot of you, it's probably one of those things that we wouldn't really necessarily know what it means right off the bat. And I feel like if you're going to exploit someone or you're going to do something at the poker table, it's always good to know exactly what you're doing. So for value, what is value betting? Well, it's simply when we think we have the best hand and we're betting thinking that our opponent will have a worse hand but will still call us. Bluffing is when we think we have the worst hand and we think our opponent will fold with better hands. So it's very important to get that concept down. Some people will sometimes say that they're value betting, but if you ask them what range they think they'll call with, they can't really think of anything. So that's not value betting. Some people might be bluffing, but they're trying to get worse hands to fold, which isn't bluffing. So it's really important that you guys understand the definitions, and that will further help us understand the concept of when to bet. Here are the secondary reasons, just a couple that I thought of off the top of my head. There's probably a couple more, but these are the biggest ones that I could think of. Secondary reasons why we bet. First one is protection. The second one is information. Third one is in tournaments to take down your equity. I'm more of a cash game player and coach cash games, but I'll cover a little bit of tournament strategy here and there. The next one is to continue initiative. That's like betting in a spot with lots of equity where you don't want to check call. You can set up as a bluff, such as barreling, or you can induce a raise. So let's continue on. So here's a value example, and these examples are going to start off pretty simple and then get more complex as we go along. But this is just value, straight up value. We raise ace of spades, king of spades on the button, and a 41-12 calls in the big blind. If you guys aren't aware of HUD stats, that's a very loose passive player, or commonly known as a fish. So the flop is ace of hearts, 6 of spades, 2 of spades. So we have top pair, top kicker, and the nut flush draw. Very easy spot for value. Opponent checks, we bet for value. Simply, we think that he'll call with worse hands, and we have the best hand a lot. So we think that he'll call with a 6, a deuce, any other worse flush draws, any worse ace, all sorts of hands. It's very easy for value. Bluff example. So we raise with 5 of spades, 6 of spades on the button, and a 41-12 calls in the big line. So similar situation. Flop is queen of spades, 7 of hearts, deuce of diamonds. Our opponent checks, we bet as a bluff. Now this again seems like a very easy concept, but let's think about hand ranges. Remember, as a bluff, you think you have the worst hand, but you're trying to get someone off of a better hand that you think will actually fold. Now this guy has a very loose range, but the loose range doesn't really smash this board that heavily. It's a super dry board. So we have 6 high. That means that almost all of their air is going to be ahead of our range. So even if they have 6-9 suited or something, we should be betting because 6-9 suited has our hand pretty crushed. And they're just going to be folding all those junk hands anyway. We might even get them to fold like a pair of twos or something, which would be really good for us because they have a made hand and we don't. So that's bluffing. So a protection example. We raise in middle position with Jack of Diamonds, 10 of Diamonds. The cutoff and button call along with a small blind and big blind. So there's 5 players on the flop. Flop comes out 10 of Spades, 7 of Hearts, 6 of Spades. So this is a spot where it's multi-way, and we have Jack 10 of Diamonds, so we have top pair, okay kicker. This is a spot where we bet for value and protection. It's not just like a hand where we're just betting for like massive value. Like our hand is good, but it's like really not that strong. We can't really handle that much heat in a 5-way pot. But we are betting because there is value to be had. We can be called by worse hands, and we're also protecting our hand because our hand is okay, but there's a lot of draws that will come in on the turn or river, such as an 8, a 9, any spade, any spade, any like overcard might be potentially bad for us. And there's 5 people in the pot, so there's a lot of cards that they have in their hands, which means that there's a lot of cards that can come on the turn and river that will make our hand the second best hand. So this is this is primarily for value, but secondarily for protection. Betting for information. This is one of those things that I hear people say all the time, and that they're like saying it incorrectly. They're saying that they're bet for information, but it's usually in a spot that is absolutely not a spot where they're getting information. It's usually when like players donk out and stuff and do goofy stuff, but they're not really doing it in a good spot. And I don't know. It kind of drives me nuts when people try to explain it that way. But this could be an example. Like we're rarely gonna bet for like just straight up information, but this is gonna be an example where we get information from a hand. So 2 people limp, and a nit reg on the button isolates, not me of course, just a reg who's actually a nit, on the button isolates big, and we call the big blind with pocket 10s. The 2 limpers call, and the 2 limpers call as well. So the flop comes 8 of clubs, 7 of clubs, and 4 of diamonds. So we have an overpair on a fairly wet board. Now, let's think about the nit's range. The nit is isolating, so he will have a slightly wider range, but if he's pretty nitty, he's going to have a lot of like huge pairs. We didn't want to 3-bet him pre-flop because let's just assume that this nit is like a pretty big nit, and if we 3-bet pre-flop with 10s, we're probably just going to be value owning ourselves because he's that tight. He's going to have like ace king and jacks through aces. Let's just say this is all hypothetical. Like let's just say he has like ace king, ace queen, and I guess let's just say nines through aces. So a really tight range. He's a nit. So obviously the people who are limp calling are giant fish, and we can get tons of value from them because this is a wet board and they'll call with like any piece of it. So if we check here, all the fish are probably going to check because they like to check call. They don't like to bet themselves. And this is a really bad board for the nit to c-bet on if he has ace king or ace queen, which accounts for a lot of his range. But so he's just going to check it back and get free cards, but we don't want free cards on this flop because this flop is really bad. There's a lot of turns and rivers that will just completely suck for us. Pretty much anything like jack through aces, any club, a 6, a 5. Almost every single card in the deck is going to suck for us multi-way. So this is actually a spot where I'll donk bet. So in this spot, we donk bet 2/3 pot for value against the loose passive fish, and to see how the button reacts for information. So if we bet and the button raises, like it's a pretty easy fold. But we're kind of just betting mostly just because we're going to get value from the fish so often, and we're kind of hoping that the button folds. If it calls, it's going to be all right, but we're going to have to kind of like evaluate the turn and river, but primarily we're just looking to get value because we don't think that the button is gonna c-bet that often on this board unless he has a monster that beats us. So another concept for value betting another concept for betting is to take down your equity. Here's an example. So let's just say it's a tournament. Like this is primarily a tournament concept. Let me kind of go into that for a little bit. In No Limit Hold'em cash games, our goal for playing No Limit Hold'em cash games is just to make profitable decisions, and in the long run, we make money. If we can make money in the long run, that's all we're trying to do. Like we win if we do that. Whether it's a penny or $1 million, we're a winning poker player. In a tournament, it's slightly different. In every single tournament, your goal is the same thing, to win every single chip that everyone has. You want to be the last person standing with all the chips on the table. In a cash game, it's nice to have all the money in the world, but you're realistically not going to have all the money in the world. You don't necessarily, your goal isn't to make all the money at the table. Your goal is just to make money in general. So in a tournament, if you consider everyone's chips as chips that you eventually want to take, because for every chip that you take, it increases your equity or percentage of the prize pool, then chips become very valuable. Whereas in a cash game, if you win like a $2 chip, or I'm sorry, a $1 chip, that chip's just worth $1. But let's say you're in a tournament, if you have half the chips, that's worth half of the prize pool. And for every person that gets knocked out, your chips become more and more valuable. So the concept of chips and equity and stuff are kind of different between cash and tournaments. So let's just say for this hypothetical example, in a tournament, blinds are 1,000, 2,000 with a $200 ante, and effective stacks for this hand are 45,000 chips. So full sweats on the button, and we steal for 4,000. We just min raise with ace-2 offsuit on the button, and both loose passive blinds call. The flop is king diamonds, 4 spades, 2 clubs. So we have bottom pair, top kicker. Well, we can't really bet for value as worse probably won't call, like worse hands. So we bet mostly as a bluff. But with the benefit of taking down 14,000 chips, with what is most likely the best hand. So yeah, we're not really value betting because worse isn't calling, so essentially we're bluffing with a showdownable hand. Now, in cash games, there's arguments for like checking this back because, I guess you can like bluff it here, but if you have showdown value in certain spots, you might want to check back certain, pairs or weak made hands, stuff like that. But in a tournament, this is a really good spot to stab because it's very cheap. You bet really small, they're going to miss a lot, and they're just going to fold, and you instantly win 14,000 chips. Now, in a cash game, relatively, you would have made maybe 9 big blinds, which is alright. But in a tournament, this is 14,000 chips. That's a third of your chip stack. That you just increase your chip stack by 33%, and that's huge in a tournament. Now your decisions, now your stack's gonna be bigger, so you can play a little bit more conservatively. You don't have to really risk your chips as much. You can sail into the money if you want. You can, you're increasing your overall equity in the tournament. So your winnings are increasing as a percentage of your chip stack. So in tournaments, that's going to be a very important strategy. I'm not like a tournament expert or anything, so I can't really comment too much on it, but that's kind of the general gist of this concept, and this concept's primarily for tournament players. Another reason we bet is because we're continuing with initiative. Initiative is one of those concepts that's debated how valuable it is. I think it's kind of valuable. I think it's pretty valuable, but it's not like the end of the world if you lose your initiative. But this is just one of those examples where I think it's a good spot. So let's say a bad reg who steals a lot and then flats 3-bets a lot goes ahead and steals on the button. So we have ace queen of clubs, and we go ahead and 3-bet for value in the big blind, and the villain calls. Pretty standard. We're raising pre-flop for value. Flop is king of clubs, jack of clubs, 6 of diamonds. So we pick up an overcard, a gut shot, the nut flush draw, and maybe our queen out is good. Now, this is a really strong hand. We want to c-bet as a semi-bluff because even though our hand is strong, it isn't a made hand, so we want fold equity in there. we could always check call, but that puts us in a really bad spot, and our hand is easy to read. We also lose any fold equity we might have. So yeah, even though our hand is like really, really strong, and against most of the hands in his range, we're actually going to be ahead. Our hand isn't a made hand, so I guess we're technically bluffing. As we want to get better hands to fold. We want to get like 6-7 to fold, or pocket 8s or whatever, because even though we have better equity, our equity really sucks on blank turns, and we have 0 equity on the river if the river comes, and he has our opponent has some sort of pair or something. So we go ahead and bluff, and it's just continuing our aggression from pre-flop, because our pre-flop 3-bet indicates that we have a strong hand, so we can continue that story on this flop and get a lot of respect and get a lot of folds against a lot of this guy's range. This is really good for us, because if we decide to check call, we lose a ton of our fold equity, and that's not really good for us, because we're basically our hand basically is one of those hands that's okay, but really becomes a strong hand when you add in fold equity. So I don't know, let's just say we have like 50% equity, and then he folds another 25% of the time. So now our hand has 75% equity instead of 50% equity, and that's where a lot of the value comes from. Another secondary reason for betting is to set up for a bluff. This is a move that I like to do a lot. It's not really recommended against like megafish that never fold any pair, but it's good in a lot of spots where you have players that are competent enough to fold. So let's say that a middle position tag reg opens, another tag reg calls on the button, and we call in the big blind with ace of hearts and queen of hearts. For whatever reason, we decided not to 3-bet this hand. So the flop comes 10 of clubs, 8 of diamonds, 5 of hearts. We check, pre-flop raiser checks, and button checks. The turn is a deuce of spades. So we know both players probably have worse than top pair, and we should know that the button probably has marginal showdown value. So obviously in this middle type of board that's somewhat connected, if the pre-flop raiser isn't c-betting, he probably just has complete air, completely whiffed, like ace king, ace queen, king queen, stuff like that. If the guy that's in position doesn't bet, it's either because he has air or because he has a hand like 8-7, but he doesn't think he can get value by betting, and he doesn't want to turn his hand into a bluff. So knowing that they both have really strong hands, knowing that they both have really weak hands, where the button might possibly have some marginal showdown value, we go ahead and bet the turn. We're gonna get we bet it as a bluff, and we're expecting the button to call some of the time, but he's gonna be folding almost 100% of the time by river. So let's say that we bet the turn. The pre-flop raiser folds, and the button calls, and the river is like the 3 of hearts or something, and we just go ahead and bomb river. Like, he's probably not calling, because he's not gonna have really a 10 in his range. Our hand is gonna be generally strong because we're leading out into multiple players and betting twice, pretty big. And also we called out of the button against the middle position opens, so our hand range in general is gonna be pretty strong. Especially relative to what he's representing and what his actual hand is. So I think that this is a really good spot. Like, we're not always going to get folds on the turn, but we're going to get folds almost always on the river. So it's kind of interesting that we're betting as a bluff, but not really expecting a fold, which is kind of a weird concept, but we're going to eventually get the fold on the river. Another secondary type of reason for betting is to induce a raise. This usually happens when you're at a game with a really spazzy player, or let's say you're in a really deep game against a guy who is just gonna like blow up the pot and not believe you, and you have like some miracle hand. This is a spot where you just kind of want to blow up the pot when you have like the nuts, essentially. Or some spots you could consider like semi-bluffing against a spaz or whatever. But here's just an example really quick to give you guys an idea. So the game is really deep. There are 4 limpers, then a super nit on the button raises big. So he's really nitty, but he's isolating all these limpers. We're going to give him a pretty strong range. It might be slightly wider just because he's on the button isolating, but he's a pretty big nit. We call in the small blind with pocket threes, thinking the other players will call behind us. Unfortunately, they all fold. So now we have pocket threes out of position against the mega nit. So the flop comes 3-2-2 rainbow. So we flop the boat. The nit probably doesn't have pocket twos. So our hand is 99.999% the best hand here. Now we're super deep, and we could try check raising. We can do a couple of things here. We could like check call and check raise turn. You know, I think that this board is so dry that this is a really good spot to go ahead and donk out because, you know, he's probably going to like his overpair and just raise it. So we decided to donk out half pot for value with the intentions of the nit raising his overpair and building a massive pot. So if we're really deep, we obviously want to build the pot as fast as possible against a guy who has the second best hand. He's going to think his aces or kings are the best hand, you know, on this board. And this is like pocket threes and pocket twos are like the only hands where we can just go nuts with and get all of his money. So we want to find the best way to get all of his money in. And if he has like 300 or 400 big blinds, you know, behind him, it's going to be very, very hard to get all of his money. So I think right here is a very safe spot to go ahead and like donk call or donk raise. It's going to be very hard for our opponent to put us on a 2. So let me go on. So that's going to kind of wrap things up. Just always remember, am I betting for value or is it bluff? And that's very important. It sounds very, very easy. I'm sure everyone that plays poker thinks they already, you know, are aware of this, but I can guarantee you that most people aren't. So whenever you go to bet, no matter how trivial it is, just ask yourself, am I betting for value or is it bluff? Thanks, guys, for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to YouTube. Check out nitreg.com and follow me on Twitter. I set up a new Twitter. I'm getting some followers at twitter.com/nitregpoker. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is one of my most favorite concepts to talk about. One of the most important, especially for the micro stakes guys. So I really hope you guys got a lot out of that. With that being said, this is Nitreg from nitreg.com, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace.